but it's also can read heavy. So I ask that we open our hearts to be with the thoughts and feelings and emotions that may arise tonight. Allow yourself to hear the information, to know it, to allow it to be. Dare to be intimate with some of the information. Honor it. Remember that the same heart that may feel heavy or burdened is the same heart that can heal, that can feel joy, that can share, that can grow. So we're going to honor our collective resilience. I'm going to ask at a point here in a moment, we're going to call out the names of some of our revolutionary freedom fighting ancestors. We're calling only at this time those who've passed through the veil. We're calling the names of those who have transitioned to charge the atmosphere, to ask that this space in time not be in vain, but be a part of an ongoing, ever growing, politically grounding, soul stretching spirit of resistance, one that swells and is persistent from each of our internal landscapes to the spheres we inhabit physically, in the spirit of Sankofa, where we reach back and remember. We go back to the root for strength. We're going to call out some of our ancestors. We're going to recall those who passed through the veil from life to death, from earth to breath. We're going to remember those who gifted us with life, Ubuntu. I am because we are. Let's take a couple deep breaths just right there, right? I am because we are. We're gonna remember the daughters of the Maroon Society who struggled to defy gravity and define liberation. We're gonna acknowledge this land, Bubancha, and the flora and fauna that inhabit the earth, that provide us with medicine and beauty and balance. Hail to those we know and love, their bodies give us strength. Reverence to those whose names we don't remember, but whose memories we carry in our DNA and our souls. Let's breathe as we remember them. Let's take a 2 or 3 deep breaths, cleansing breaths here. Together, we can cultivate our collective healing. From the sacred center of our being, we can imagine, we can breathe together collectively, remember, and go forward, building ourselves, building us up, removing the weeds of the false ideology of white supremacy and allowing the seeds of liberation to grow so that we can cultivate it and look forward to a future where we are unoppressed, where we are the determiners of our liberation, and where we can live off the land, which we'll be talking about tonight. So I'm gonna pour some libation here. I'm going to ask us to unmute only to say one of your ancestors' names. This is someone who has transitioned. I'm going to start with um, um, Queen Nanny. Her name tried to slip my tongue while we're thinking about land. Queen Nanny. Layla says Harriet Tubman.
Claudia Jones.
Zumbi.
Fannie Lou.
Ashe, Ashe.
George Jackson.
Ashe.
Fred Hampton.
Don't be shy. We're asking for permission. We're asking for blessings.
Ella Baker.
Rosalie
Okay.
Couteau.
Ashe.
Berta Cáceres.
Gloria
can-
Turner.
Ashe.
Gabrielle Prosper.
Ashe.
Zora Neale Hurston.
Ashe. We can begin to call out the names of those who are in our direct bloodline, who have been exemplary, who've given us of themselves so that we can be. I'm going to call Louis Michael Varnado.
Michael Anthony Moore Sr., Irvin Pierre Young, Gloria Green.
Ashe.
Lewis.
Mildred Abney.
Ashe.
Jesse McGee, Chris Armand.
Ashe. Let's get three
Rosemary
more.
Lane.
Mini battle.
Carol Bush
Okay.
Patterson.
Ashe. Ashe.
Granddaddy Andrew, Granddaddy Skeeter.
Ashe. One more.
Maria Gallegos.
Ashe. Y'all just take a few moments, breathe, ground yourself, and we're going to hear from our sister Sierra Lagarde, who is a member of the Choctaw Nation, and she's going to talk to us about the land.
Thank you, Corey, for that picture you gave me.
Because that's the perfect time to throw that in.
No problem.
Thank you.
Halito, Salvatore ut Sierra Lagarde, Mitcha Chatavela Convencia. Hello, everyone. My name is Sierra Lagarde, and I'm a member of the Bayou Lacombe Band of Choctaw, located in Lacombe, Louisiana. I'd like to begin by saying Yoko Kachiro. Thank you very much to Angela and to the other members of Taken Down NOLA for giving me this opportunity to speak today. And thank you to all of you in the crowd who are here today in solidarity in our fight to decolonize history. New Orleans, 300. Ulbancha, 3,000. Let that sink in. As we stand here today, let us recognize this land acknowledgement, where everywhere you step in this city, every bayou you see, and every beautiful view you admire is all on native land. May we remember the Achapatula, the Chawasha, the Oklapisa, the Bayukokla, the ancient Achapakti, the Chata, and many other tribes of peoples who lived here before, not in New Orleans, but in the city in which my tribe called Ulbancha, the land of many tongues. We are here today because we are tired of being surrounded by false narratives. Where everywhere we look in this city, we see these monumental statues dedicated to these so-called monumental men, like Andrew Jackson and like Jean-Baptiste Bienville. But these men were never great. Okay, they were never great, but rather are the very illusion of greatness, because all of their so-called achievements were done through the systematic exploitation and suffering of Native and Black peoples. When I look at the Bienville statue, I see a false representation of a Chitimacha man sitting defeated next to a tall, standing Jean-Baptiste Bienville. But Bienville never founded New Orleans in 1718. Why? Because it was an already established city inhabited by many of our indigenous communities. But that's not written in history books, now is it? When I see the Jackson Monument, I see him sitting victoriously on his horse, relishing in his new title of Savior of the Crescent City. But in fact, he would have never won without the help of the enslaved and Choctaw people. Well, you know what? I say no more. If there is anyone in this country who knows what our Black brothers and sisters are going through, it's us. We are perpetually linked, by the systematic oppression and racism that have bound us together since the founding of this country. They were taken from their land, and we had our land taken from us. But make no mistake, we Indigenous and Black peoples are not defeated. We are the true victors of their oppression because we are still here. And guess what? We are not going anywhere. We survived here in Volbacha and across Indian country, and we will dismantle the legacies of these white suppressors. Andrew Jackson's hero of the Mississippi and Bienville's founder of New Orleans, and show that we as Indigenous people stand with our Black brothers and sisters, our oldest allies, in both our fights for equality and justice. Now, before I go, I would like to share with you a few days ago of what I dreamed. That I was standing at the base of the Bienville Monument, and as I looked up, I saw that the statue had actually been removed. That all of this that was left was a blank pedestal. That all that was left was a blank pedestal. An opportunity for a true telling of history. And to my surprise, that same morning, Angela actually contacted me and asked me to record this message. This gives me the feeling that something powerful is about to happen, and that this is a legacy that I am happy to say we are all a part of. Yoko Kichiro, thank you very much, and stay safe, everyone.
All right. So I think Angela is going to be our first speaker tonight. So we got a lot to cover. I'm just going to turn it right over to her.
Okay, welcome everyone. I am going to maintain the space in this gallery view so that I can look into your eyes while I speak to you right now. I want to maximize the few minutes that I have with you before our brilliant speakers come before you today. And I want to start off by just saying how much it means that you are all in this space with us tonight. I want to speak to you like family. And I realize that there may be some things that get said tonight that resonate with people in different ways. Some things are going to align with your beliefs, some things may not. But I'll ask that you do the work necessary to assess in your body and in your mind what you might be feeling and why, and to work through whatever it is so that at the end of this call, we are able to move forward from a place of solidarity. And we're going to talk about what that means for us tonight. So let me start by saying that Take 'em Down NOLA exists for the purpose of removing all symbols to white supremacy from the landscape of New Orleans as a much necessary part of the struggle toward racial and economic justice. Now, I say that because most people fail to acknowledge or recognize or understand the latter part. But we understand that we make the connection between symbols and systems. And we understand that they are so connected that when we have to contend with the symbols, we come to realize the ways in which they represent the systems, they represent the values, the beliefs, and the ideologies that manifest themselves in exploitive and oppressive systems. And so while we engage in the work of take them down, we also engage in the work of build them up. And sometimes the build them up work seems like it takes just as long because we understand that we have to contend with history in a real way to ensure that the new things that we say we are building don't replicate the things that we say we are aiming to leave behind. We reserve the full right to dismantle things that are not edifying our collective well-being. And we reserve the full right to build those things that we know will nurture our development. And so with this being said, as we're contending with this issue around housing, we also know that we have to contend with the issue around land. So often people want to entertain conversations about housing separate from the land, but we must examine the land and we must talk about and we must be willing to pursue reclaiming the land. Now, that doesn't mean the same thing to all people, but we want to be able to talk about what it means to us. When we think about the land, we have to know as Black people in our bodies that we acknowledge Indigenous people. And we have to acknowledge that when we say indigenous, for us, that does not negate Blackness. We know that there are many people that we see around the world that separate this idea of being Black and being Native, being Black and being indigenous, but there are many indigenous people that are as melanated as all of us could be combined and then some. And even if they don't identify with identity of calling themselves Black, we know that that melanation is real and is not to be denied. And so as we move forward in solidarity, we're gonna have to deal with the complexities of all of what this means and the complexities of how we attend to pursuing housing equity if we're gonna leave land on the table. And we have to ask ourselves, if we're contending with land, what does that mean for us in terms of the ways in which we can develop housing in ways that are healthy and whole for us? So we're dealing with this in the middle of COVID-19. We're dealing with this in the middle of a Black uprising, right? Uprising for Black lives. And we know part of this fight has made us collectively be accountable to say that if Black lives matter, all Black lives have to matter. Each and every Black life has to matter. So that means that we need all Black people to honor, respect, and acknowledge the humanity of Black trans women. And if that is the case, then that also means that when we're talking about honoring being indigenous, within indigenous communities, there are Black people. And so as we pursue this effort and as we move forward, we want to be able to stand in alignment with nations of people pursuing sovereignty in the name of self-determination, to be able to be true stewards of the land. But we know that no nation of people can be free if it oppresses other nations of people. I do not use the word nation and country synonymously. When I refer to nations of people, I'm referring to groups of people who share language, who share culture, who share economies. We're talking about groups of people, and we happen to reside in a country. Those of us on this call, most of us on this call, may very well reside in a country that is actively perpetuating imperialism around the globe. And we know that if we live in a country like the US, this is a country made up of many nations of people. And so the ways in which we can demonstrate the most solidarity in our fights is understanding that there's no respect for colonial borders, but there's all respect for working class people around the globe who may not speak the same language, who may not reside in the same places, that we have more in common with one another than we will ever have for the rich capitalists, the rich ruling class that aims to seek and devour us all. So when we say that, what do we mean? As we look at this mass uprising for Black lives, we understand that most of these uprisings have had to face police terror, and we have seen Black bodies be gunned down in the streets. Our fight has been for Black Lives Matter while we yet live, because we understand that while we're fighting back police terror, police exists for a function. And it doesn't matter if the police officer is your cousin, your brother, your friend from high school. They have a function, and their function is to protect private property and protect the profits of the rich. That's what it is. Even the ones that smile at you and escort you across the street during a festival, they have a function. And we have to understand that that function, as it relates to protecting private property, means that we're not going to be able to contend with the police until we contend with their function, which means that if we really, really, really wanted to eliminate police terror, we would equally want to eliminate privatization. We would equally want to address the fundamental issue of who gets to own the land. Who gets to own the land? Now, I know some of you own property. We're not talking about your personal property right now, but we're going to talk about privatization in a real way. So if we were to stand back and really examine all of the land on earth, and we have conformed to this idea of purchasing property. We've conformed to this idea of selling property. We've conformed to this idea of paying somebody rent for a house on a piece of land that who declared they own. So whoever were the people who first said, I own property, I have paperwork attached to this, and you will adhere to the way I've divided it up. Those are the original thieves. So when we talk about the land, all of the land that's been colonized has been stolen, and we're talking about around the globe. All of the land that's been colonized means that wherever there is oppression breeds resistance. And we're not just fighting for housing, we're fighting for the land. And we have to fight for the land, because if we have conformed to ownership, selling of the land, paying for the land, then we're also conforming to the idea of paying for water. We've done that as well. And so as we, in the middle of COVID-19, walk around with our masks on for the purpose of communal health, we're also dealing with the real reality that the land, the water, and now the air is constantly being polluted. And it's constantly being polluted by a capitalist system that's spreading its tentacles around the globe through imperialism, this highest form of capitalism that we could see. So if we really want to do this work, we're going to have to lean in on the solidarity in a way that we never have before. And solidarity doesn't mean simply getting to declare because we've attended an anti-racism, undoing racism workshop, that we get to declare that we're anti-racist. If we're anti-racist, we would be anti-capitalist, because capitalism is anti-Black. And we just have to make these connections in a real way, because in order for us to contend with the issues of the land at some point, we're going to have to contend with privatization. And that privatization thing makes itself manifest not only in housing, it makes itself manifest in all utilities, it makes itself manifest in our education system, it makes itself manifest with the grocery stores. Everything that we need to survive that is connected to profit will always be an issue if it is in the hands of a few. But the good news today is that there's more of us than there are of them. And we could decide right now that we value our lives and we value the lives of exploited and oppressed people around the world, and we're willing to do what's necessary. So we're hoping that tonight you will be able to hear the multitude of information that's being shared, the many forms of acts of resistance, and the ways in which those acts of resistance, whether they be revolutionary or not, be an entry point to the conversation, because we are clear that Take 'em Down NOLA's work is an entry point to the conversation, that as we contend with symbols that represent these systems, that we will inevitably do the work necessary within ourselves and our communities to contend with these systems. So we just want to thank you all for being here tonight. And for those of you who are interested in exploring what we mean in a deeper way around privatization, there'll be plenty of opportunities and extensions of invitation to engage in political study. So I turn it back over to you, Vonna, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Angela. So next, because we trying to provide a whole experience out here for y'all, my brother Quest is gonna come through with some of his artistic blessings for us.
All right, y'all. Honor and privilege to share some words with y'all in the tradition of the late, great John Scott. Is when honoring ancestors, something that we like to say in the spoken word community here in New Orleans, is if you are ready for the word, you indicate that to us by saying pass it on. I don't want y'all to unmute. That's going to be a whole lot of chaos, but y'all can, just give me a little snap, a little hand up or something like that when I say the thing. I ain't say the thing yet, though. Y'all ready, though? I appreciate that. Are we ready for the word? Gentrification in 5 parts. A play on the senses. Which smells like lemon pledge and bologna, mixed with a dash of gutter punk funk. Sounds like a churning coffee bean grinder set to a backdrop of new construction. Can't tell the difference between the grind outside and the grind inside. Sounds like number 9, your cappuccino, vanilla mocha soda, and Cypress Hill latte's done. And sorry, man, but we don't have any vacancies for occupants in 3 or more. Looks like a boarded up home in disrepair next to a newly refurbished one. Fresh coat of paint still glistening. Looks like a rigid white girl's jawbones and her pet pit bull snarl like a band of scraggly headed hopefuls riding bikes 10 feet in the air past a wrinkled old brown woman on her porch. Looks like the look in that woman's eyes would have swore she just seen an alien ship. Looks like the look the hopefuls on bikes never give if the word aloof could campaign for a picture in the dictionary who put a Nikon 360 camera on those kids. Tastes like nothing, yet somehow still familiar, like your mama's favorite dish, but she forgot all the seasoning, you know, too much everything you never asked for, and when you got it, and much applied to you, like cappuccino vanilla goes on a Cypress Hill latte with the side of kale. Feels like an eerie sense of something that ain't quite right, but how do I put my finger on it when it keeps slipping from my grasp? How identify what keeps disappearing like a floorboard slipped from beneath your feet. Then the whole room, then the whole house, then all of a sudden, brand new floorboard, brand new house, but no more you. Feels like a slow burn that only melts all your skin off 10 years after the fact, like colonization in a latex glove. Like, I think I'm getting pumped, but I'm not quite sure. Feels like never getting to come out the kitchen when company comes. Like, been working in the kitchen my whole life, and they just up and hired a whole new staff out the blue. Just like that, told my recipes ain't good here no more. Told me the restaurant patrons don't like my ingredients. Said it wasn't cappuccino, but in the Cypress Hill I take with a side of kale enough. Told me they got some new cooks now. But I could always go apply at the shop round the corner. Only, wasn't no shop round the corner. Told me, nice job, Uncle Ben. Anime, we sure do appreciate your service. Just so happens it's not needed around here anymore, but leave your kids. Your kids can stay. We've got a nice shiny new building to teach them in where they can learn all about our predecessors like Marco Polo and Christopher Columbus. So one day, when they grow up, they may not always know when we're gonna show up, but they'll always, always, always know us when we get here.
Yes. Thank you for that, brother. Whew. It's going to be real tonight, y'all. So our next speaker is Trev, coming through talking to us about redlining and gentrification. Trev, we appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge my family. I got family members on this thing and I haven't seen their faces in months. One of them years. Just thank you. I love y'all and I really appreciate you being here. Quest, you got the slides? All right. Just let me know. All right, so next, we're moving past these two. This as well. All right, so let's start. Redlining and gentrification. Next, how did we get here? I think it's important to talk about where it started because we could easily say, well, this happened and this happened, but what conditions created it? So in 1929 to 1933, the stock market crashed and it was the biggest economic crash so far. I say so far because the way we're headed, you can't know. More people were unhoused and unemployed than at any point in time in United States history. I will preface that again, so far. So unhoused people made homes of scraps. This is actually a photo of a Hooverville. It was a tent city where people made homes out of tin, scraps of wood, and cloth, and they would move from town to town for jobs during this time. Now, also to add insult to injury, this is also the Jim Crow times. So Black people may live in proximity to white people, but they're not allowed to go to the same stores, the same schools. They are not allowed to go in the fronts of buildings. We know these stories, but keep this in mind because at the same time, that everyone's suffering, Black people are suffering even more. Also important to note that the rich people were still rich. Wealthy people did not become poor when the stock market crashed. There was still a large percentage of people who maintained wealth, just like right now with COVID, how there are people in the stock market, Jeff Bezos, those types, making 20 and 30 times what they had before. This economic crash only affected the people at the bottom. We can go to the next one. The New Deal. So many people are familiar with the New Deal, but not exactly how you get to the New Deal. Before the FHA, home loans were a 5-year loan for 50% of the mortgage. So you had to be able to pay 50% upfront and then the other 50% within 5 years. And most people had to take multiple loans just to pay for one house. So the government came in and gave people 95% guarantee towards the bank, and they would help to pay for the house over 30 years. Now, when the government did this, they gave loans through the FHA and the New Deal, but they gave 0% of those loans to Black people. In these came the suburbs, and the neighborhoods in the contracts from the FHA must remain homogeneous, which means Black people had to live next to Black people, white people had to live next to white people. Now, before this, there were mixed neighborhoods where Black people and white people lived alongside each other. They just were still segregated in every other way. So it is really interesting with the invention of the suburbs, and with the suburbs also comes the Public Works Department. The Public Works Department provided temporary jobs to make streets, roadways, and Black people were able to get these jobs. Ooh, Quest, you're going too far. Black people were able to get these jobs, but these jobs were not long-term sustainable jobs. Also, a part of this is the Farm Securities Act, and we can't talk about this without talking about the workforce. So right now we know that servers are not paid minimum wage, and neither are agricultural workers. In the New Deal, those people were excluded from minimum wage because 2/3 of the Black workforce work domestically or agriculturally. So these things still apply now. When the Federal Security Farm Act came out, they fired 200,000 sharecroppers. This is mostly Black people, just so they wouldn't have jobs, not because they didn't need to grow food, just to make them unemployed. And these are government policies. So we have to keep in mind what's going on is not a local policy. It is a government policy. Next slide. Public housing used to be, when it started, it was on a state and local level. And public housing was almost exclusively white. This is actually an old photo from New Orleans up here, but public housing was mostly your Irish, Italian, and Jewish immigrants. And it was on a state-by-state basis. When the federal government took over public housing, you get the shift into Black people in public housing. One of the things that people don't necessarily talk about when they talk about the shift in public housing is that the government knew they created conditions for criminality. When Irish and Italian and Jewish workers could not get work and they were deprived of economic opportunities, they turned to crime. We all know the stories of the gangs of Chicago, the gangs of New York, and all of those different areas. The government knew that they created conditions for criminality. Now, under the New Deal, these people were allowed mobility and allowed to move to the suburbs. And then they moved in Black and brown people into those same conditions. So when we say the government created crime, literally, they tested it out on a group of people and then brought it to another group of people. We could go to the next slide. Now we move into what they call urban renewal, which is actually Black removal, if we're going to be honest. This picture may be familiar to some and not to all. This is the St. Roch Market, what it used to be and what it is now. The project of urban renewal is between redlining and gentrification, and it's something that we don't talk about enough. When we address the city of New Orleans, we often talk about it used to be there, it ain't there no more. The Claiborne Interstate section, for example, they cut down all those trees and they called it urban renewal. It removed Black businesses, it removed Black homes, it displaced people, it separated families. And this is government policy now. This is the government calling eminent domain on people's property. And they did it with Armstrong Park. They did it with the Municipal Auditorium. They've done it over and over again. So this idea that, oh, Black people can pull themselves up by the bootstraps and they can make a way. Okay, they did. They did. And every time they did, the government came in and they called eminent domain and just took their property. They said, oh, we need to build a road here. We need to put a park here. Let's put an interstate there. And this is how we get where we are now, because Black people have had upward mobility. We have risen from the circumstances, and other people on this presentation will talk about it. We have risen from horrible circumstances over and over again. And there have been policies on the books. If you know me, you know I took about 3 hours a day for the last 3 weeks researching this, and there's so many laws. I could give you all my source material, and I don't think it's hard for your stomach. You can't handle it. I cried the first couple hours just reading, because every time we got a leg up, knocked us back down. Truman's Fair Deal after the New Deal was aimed at World War II veterans to help them get housing, but it was only white World War II veterans. They rarely, if ever, gave the same loans to Black people. You don't get an Equal Housing Act until 1962. We can go to the next slide. What is gentrification? Gentrification is a term that was coined by Ruth Glass, a British scholar, who talked about how the influx of middle-class people into neighborhoods displaced lower-class people in London. So this is actually a term that comes from London that moves over to the US. And the idea is that higher income or higher status drives out people who have lived in areas for decades. I will say that gentrification and urban renewal go hand in hand. There are developers and companies that come in. When you look at gentrification, you often think of hipsters on bikes. It's not necessarily the case. A lot of times it's a hedge fund, it's a corporation, it's a group of people who got together who had a lot of money and decided to buy property. In New Orleans, there is a group of developers, these guys that went to Tulane. It was on WWL. I can send you the video if you want the link. But they decided to make these condos that are like $4,000 a month. And Eric Paulson says, who are you going to rent them to? Because the average income in New Orleans cannot support this. We can go to the next one. Just speaking on the lines of urban renewal and gentrification working hand in hand. So if the corporation comes in first and starts building up buildings, they'll ask the city for a grant to then make the roads. If the government decides to come in and pave the roads, corporations will say, oh, this is an opportunity to come in and buy up all this low price property to match this new interstate system. They actually build suburbs with streets that curve and cul-de-sacs so that they don't fit a grid, so that people can't easily walk into them. All of this is by design. Oh, we're out of order. Go to the next slide, please. All right, and that was just one on urban renewal, but the next one is actually the picture I wanted to show. This is a photo of actual urban renewal. This is an actual photo of the government going in and seizing all of this property to make one public works building. So when you talk about gentrification, you have to talk about the part of individual contributions as well as the part of the government, because the government will uproot a whole street, a whole neighborhood, because they want to build a library or a field. And it's very rarely a library, unless they just want to uproot a whole neighborhood. All right, let's go to the next one. I talked about this already, but I'm not old enough to remember this. I never saw the trees. But this is North Claiborne. And when I saw this, it broke my heart. I mean, I think I've seen it maybe once or twice, but this is Black business. This is Black business. These are Black homes. These are Black families. These are Black communities. One of the many people that I saw speak about this said that people in the neighborhood had trees. And if you wanted to see somebody or their cousin, you knew such and such's family is going to be at this tree. And it was a center for community. People would come to the middle and they would talk and they would congregate. And if somebody cooked, you got invited to their house. And you replace that with this road system. But what they didn't do is put these roads in the French Quarter, because those people had money. Those people had influence. And those people said, no, you're not going to build a road here. You're not going to ruin us like you're going to ruin those Black people, but you could go ruin those Black people. And now there's a movement to uproot the interstate, to get a more modern system of transportation. But they don't want to do that for us. They want to do that because it's going to look nice next to their big old 2-lane hospital and their newly renovated 2-lane avenue that they gentrified just to make this one hospital when Charity was fully functional except for the first 3 floors. But that's about to be luxury condos for doctors to visit every once in a while. Next slide, please. All right, so I think it's very important to know how this all ties in together, because we start with redlining, we go to urban renewal. Urban renewal has never left. Redlining has never left. The bank's practices of giving unfair housing loans has never left. There was recently an article about a Black woman who took all the photos of her Black family out of her home, and the appraisal value went up. So this practice is not over, but I think it's very important to know all of the components and how they work together. But right now, 87% of major metropolitan cities that were red lines are being gentrified. So they create these conditions for low property, and they've done it in the past as well. They used to call it blockbusting. If one Black person moved into a neighborhood, banks would go to white people and say, you got to sell low. These people are about to ruin your neighborhood. And those people would sell for pennies. And then they would go back and sell it to Black people at a higher price margin. All of this is by design. And you can look at the legislation. There, in deeds for homes, it says no Negro shall live in this property. In suburbs, when white people signed a lease, they signed a lease that said no Negro shall live in this property. And these things are still on the record today. It's a lot to take in, and it's happening all over, but it's not just one thing. And I want to make that very clear to everybody, because once you start going down this rabbit hole, it's very apparent that it's not just redlining, it's not just gentrification, it's not just urban renewal. It's all of these things working together at once. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Trev. Appreciate you. Awesome job bringing through the information, planting them seeds. My sister Vanna's going to take it from here in just a second.
Yeah, I was having trouble unmuting. Thanks, brother. Thank you, Trev. Just thinking, I was also like lost in the sauce with that last thought that you left us with, thinking about how the superstructure is at work on so many different levels, to just literally keep us blinded and distracted away from everything but like what we should be focusing on, which is like getting the music production. But that's political study. Get in there if you're not already in there. Our next speaker, Layla has my phone because she's on with her meet, is oh wait, I'm sorry. Before we go to the next speaker, I also wanted to mention the comment that Aretha put into the chat, because I think that local information is important. She says that many of our current city council members are personally investing in these groups, talking about the groups that are buying up these buildings. Cindy Nguyen, for example, is one of the investors who's purchased a lot of property in New Orleans. So I just, that was a good fact that I want to make sure everybody heard if you didn't see it in the chat. So Quest, help me out and let me know who is next as well as on my phone.
So next we got on deck our comrade Juniper is about to give us some beautiful visions. Something that we try to do with all of these forums is present not just the problem and that which we need to take down. That's why we call ourselves taking them down. But as I'm pretty sure Angela alluded to in the beginning, if not directly said, build them up. We also want to show solutions. We're not just diagnosing the problem here, but we solutionary revolutionaries. So we got our comrade here, Juniper, who is about to give us a beautiful vision of a powerful solution that they are working on up in VA.
Thank you, Quest. Thank you, Trev, for that powerful presentation. And thank you all for having me. So I'm gonna just be brief, and I'm just here to talk about the possibilities when we say land back. So I'm ready for my slides. Okay, you can go to the next slide. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so this is Maroon Grove Freedom Farm. It's a Black liberated farm that was received through large-scale monetary reparations in early 2020 of this year. It is a Black, queer, and trans-led space, and our goal is to provide access to lands, plant medicine, and food as medicine for all oppressed peoples, centering queer and trans folks and Black African Indigenous descendants and Indigenous folks of Turtle Island through mutual aid and solidarity efforts. Next slide. So this vision was driven by all my kindred who worked in fields for generations up to my dad's generation. And my dad pictured here, he grew up on a tenant farm in northeastern North Carolina in Nash County. And he started working in the fields when he was 12 years old, and mainly they picked tobacco, he and my grandparents. And so, as you can see here, today he's able to garden at his own will, at his own pace. And that has been really healing to do that earthwork with him. And as someone who grew up in such an oppressive and captive system of sharecropping or neo-enslavement, that's very, very radical of him to be able to continue to work through the lands. And on the right, these are my grandparents, my granddaddy Andrew and my grandmama Minnie. And they were sharecroppers of my dad. And I didn't know them in this lifetime, but the more earthwork I do, the more wisdom I gain from them through spirit. So we can go to the next one. So this is some of the food that we grew over the summer. This was our first growing season. we cranked out through people power. I think it's like 12 beds we built in 4 days, which is pretty wild. We were trying to beat the rain. And we've got some borage and some squash, some southern cowpeas, and the chickens, and some indigenous corn. And these are seeds of resistance in itself. And all of this food was donated to mutual aid groups in the city. And we plan to expand our growing space next year too, so we can get more food out and medicine to the people. We also did the Black Farmers Market this year as well. And the Black Farmers Market in Richmond just started in August. So that's been really great to connect with people as well. You can go to the next slide. Okay. So Maroon Grove is not only a farm, but also a transformational space for all oppressed peoples to embody and envision liberation for Black people everywhere. This is a ceremonial space for work and rest, a place to learn how to heal and build our relationship with the land across generations. We've had youth come from Richmond who have done awesome jobs helping us with building projects and helping us out in the garden. And you can see some books on the far left. And we're a predominantly working, Black working class area here in Waverly, Virginia, Nottoway land. And we don't have any grocery stores except for 20 miles away. And we have 2 prisons in this county and the surrounding counties. But we don't have a grocery store, you know? So we want to support our relatives in all the directions, and we want to support our folks on the inside and provide a transitional space for those who are returning. And Maroon Grove just empowers autonomy for all oppressed peoples and for our non-human relatives that have always been here as well. So all in all, this is a sanctuary for Black liberation and for our folks who are incarnated in non-human bodies and in animal bodies and in bodies of water and all of those things. So yeah, like I said, this is brief, but I just want to show y'all the possibilities of just land liberation and large scale reparations and what we mean when we say land back. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Juniper. Thank you for being willing to jump on kind of last minute with this and share and illuminate our worlds with this like great thing. Like so much of the work sometimes is just like getting people to decolonize their minds and their imaginations more pointedly. So to be able to see this in real time right now with real people saying fuck the gender binary and getting it in, I love it. Just my experience like from the pandemic planting okra and planting some of the little small stuff that I could plant, I feel healed and grounded just having my hand in the ground. So I can only imagine the depth and breadth of the healing energy and all the good things that you get from just being able to like literally lay out in the dirt and do that work, like you said, at your own pace, in your own time, without the oppressor. So yeah, that was good. Also, another side thought really quick is thinking about how we had so many different options for food. In that picture of the corn, Layla and I had this moment, like corn isn't just yellow. So just like, not gonna go off on a tangent, but thinking about how even our food has been like Euro-American palatalized. That's my word. Okay, so next we're going to have Derek, who is a warrior, a freedom fighter, resident or former resident. His mother still lives in Gordon Plaza. He's rocking that fly t-shirt right now. Derek, come.
Thank you, Vanna. Let's see if I can share my screen here. And also thank you, Juniper and Trev. Quest and Corey, and welcome everyone. Let's see. All right, share. Okay. Yeah. Okay, hold on, y'all. I'm trying to, it says Big E is trying to get in the room, but I don't know how to get there. Is there another administrator?
You're it at this point, Derek, till you shift it back to me.
Got it. I figured it out.
Okay, great. You got it.
Yeah. All right. So I let Big E in. All right. All right. So most of us know the story of Gordon Plaza as a single neighborhood, but not in the context of the entire area, which is the Carver Desire area. And so, you know, it's often a untold or half-told story. So I want to share with you what the neighborhood was like, how it came to be, what it was like, and then what happened with Gordon Plaza. So here's a requiem for Gordon Plaza, the Carver Desire neighborhood. All right, hold on, y'all. I'm trying to move some stuff around so I can see. Anyway, all right. So in this first act, from 1900 to 1949, as you can see on the map, there was really nothing in this area. It was, in the Ninth Ward, it was bound by the New Orleans Terminal Railroad, the L&N Railroad, which is the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, and then there was infinite swamp towards the east. And before 1900, there was really no record of any people who had ever lived on this land. And if there were, it would be logical that it would be indigenous Native Americans. And I can't see something, hold on, y'all. It's hard for me to move things around. Anyway, the Colored Normal and Industrial School opened on the land in 1902. It was a Black and Native American woman who spent her time helping colored children or Black children who were imprisoned, you know, of course, through the 13th Amendment. And, you know, the prison industrial complex way back in the early 1900s. And she built a school with $5,000 that she raised. The Agriculture Street landfill, I can't see my notes here. Let's see, hold on. How do I move? I can't move anything around. All right, hold on, y'all. Okay, now I got it, hold on. All right. It's kind of tricky here. I'm trying to get back. Screen share, it's causing me some problems. Trying to hit play on, I know what to do. Let's see. There we go. All right, I'm straight now. What's happening is
When it's in presentation mode, it knocks the notes off.
Yeah, well, I don't have notes. It's trying to get me to let people in the room. Can you unshare the screen? Can you stop the share?
I think you're a host, so you're sharing it. You'd have to stop the share.
We can alert people and let them in between. Derek, you can keep going.
I can't get the slideshow to move. I can't make anything move because it's really trying to do two things at once.
Why? Is it because of people trying to get in?
No, it's just it doesn't show me my mouse, and I can't get back to. I can't toggle. I can't do anything. I'm sorry about that.
Let me see. It was just this one person who is trying to get in. I just let him back in. I'm gonna give you back the host capacity. Are you better now? Like, can you move now?
No, I can't move at all. Could you stop the share? Or you
Yeah.
can't?
Well, that's your screen. That's your screen doing the share.
I can't move around at all. Okay, here we go. Maybe it's moving now. All right. So the Agriculture Street landfill opened on this land in 1909. The Industrial Canal opened in 1924, and that's interesting because that is commerce coming into the area. And in 1946, we saw that colored soldiers were able to buy homes through the Louisa Street GI project. We saw the St. Philip the Apostle Church, which was built in 1947. And in 1948, we saw the prohibition of the open air landfills in the state of Louisiana. And the big deal in 1949 was when the U.S. Housing Act authorized the construction of the new Desire Housing Project. All right, so with the Industrial Canal, it will become the border to the east that was infinite swampland at first. So now we see railroads coming in, we see a major waterway for the commerce fully surrounding this small area. And it was not until 1939 that we saw actual street maps. So it was after the Industrial Canal, or as you can see, this is the capital that's coming through. They have to have somewhere for their ships to go. Their trains have to pass by. But they didn't develop the land much further than that when it came to living and community. The first street maps, as I stated, came up in around that showed streets in about 1931. If you see the highlighted area to the right, that is the entire Carver Desire area. If you see where Law Realty Company and Bienville Realty Company are, that is the Agriculture Street landfill, more the Law Realty Company. And you see the Colored Industrial School and Home that is also listed in the top middle section. On the left, you see the red line districts, or the areas where, I'm sorry, red like this, where the red lining and the green lining and the other parts of the map that were drawn out to show where loans would be permitted for Black residents. But if you look at the Carver Desire area, you don't see that at all, but you see just outside of this area that is non-inhabited, it is also redlined. Let's see. So here we have the St. Philip Catholic Church that was opened. We have a picture here of the 1967 newly modeled church. The original church was in 1949. So you start to see that a community is coming into play. To the right, we see the finished construction before folks moved into the Desire Housing Project. All right, if you take a look at the map or the aerial view in the middle, you'll see that this is where Gordon Plaza is today. And you see the swampland that was the reason that they put the landfill here in order to fill it in. So when the landfill was closed by law, the city of New Orleans circumvented that law by sanitizing and using carcinogenic chemicals to sanitize and keep the smell and what they thought was keep the pollution away, but they were polluting it even more. All right, so from 1949 to 1983 is when this area gets its identity. Some people call it the Mighty Nine. We have, in a part of this second act, you see that the white residents sued the city of New Orleans for negligence as it relates to the operation of the Agriculture Street landfill. Again, 7 more years passed and the city polluted the landfill during those 7 years before closing it down permanently. In 1956, the residents moved into the Desire. Carver Senior High School opens in 1958. And if you look at the left, you see this really state-of-the-art high school in 1958 at the time. And this is where the colored industrial and normal school was located. So now you have this complex with an elementary school. If you look at the front part, this elementary school, I went to this elementary school. On the front right, that wing, in the left wing, that all of that is the elementary school. The back part on the left is a junior high school, and the back part on the right is a senior high school. And Mr. Jesse, my mom, Mr. Jesse, and pretty much everybody in the area went to this high school. The new St. Philip Church that you previously saw, it opened as well. And in 1971, the residents moved into Press Park. So now, you know, the neighborhood is pretty much complete. The last group of people to move in, and this was a unique entity because the residents of Gordon Plaza and the senior citizens in this home, of course, moved on this dump area, but the residents of Gordon Plaza, it was more like a new suburban development, which they'd never seen in that area. The last real development was for the Black GIs that were coming into the area and other residents who lived along that Louisa Street strip. So now you have Press Park, and in 81 you have Gordon Plaza. So the real mecca for the Desire Housing Project, for the Carver Desire area, which it's colloquially called, was the Desire Project. And the Desire Project, there were, in 1956 when they opened, there were 262 two-story buildings and more than 1,800 individual housing units. The land mass was more than 100 acres. And in the 1960s, more than 13,000 people lived in the project. Enclosed in it was 2 elementary schools, a community center, a nursery, and there was also a drugstore outside of it. Now, because the American South was in the throes of Jim Crow, nearly 100% of these families were Black, and also in the entire area. And so for that reason, this project, it's interesting to note, was solely under the decision-making of the white ruling class politicians who had to answer the question, you know, what do we do with our Black workers for this area and for other areas of the city? Here we have Press Park Apartments, which opens in 1971. Actually, I moved in there in 1971 as a 2-year-old. And this was, you know, some more what we thought was great development for the area. Here you have one of the community leaders, Miss Flora, and I believe she's related to John Scott, who you mentioned, Quest. So now we have a Catholic church, we have a Lutheran church, we have Carver Desire Baptist Church, we have New Birth Baptist Church. So this complex, Press Park, is governed by Hanno, developed and governed by Hanno. So we see this large complex, we see the Desire Project, we see 2 parks, we see Sampson Park, we see Magruder Park, which is little talked about, but it is also on the Agriculture Street landfill. Now, Moon Landrew mentioned in his own words on A Place Called Desire, the documentary that was a part of a recent film festival, that the Desire Housing Project was also on a landfill, and that's never talked about. All right, so it's important to stress that there was a lot of pride in this area, and mainly because of the 2 anchors, the Carver High School. I mean, the high school was everything. The Desire Housing Projects was everything. The project bustled with healthy families attending public schools. You know, I can remember my father telling me about the children skating on Christmas Day in the projects. It was one of the largest high schools, and the school was a force to be reckoned with. If you were playing Carver, you knew, you know, you had to be ready. So, you know, annually. The parades were just super festive. Like, you know, you had the Catholic Churches parade, you had the Carver Homecoming parade, and everybody showed up and everybody showed out. But as in all urban centers, you know, the pride was on high, and the resources were dwindling. So our urban centers were really left for dead as white residents started moving out of certain neighborhoods due to white flight. So, you know, after the civil rights movement and the death of Martin Luther King, you know, we saw a shift in that pride. It went from, you know, just having family values and adequate housing to an aesthetic, to self-determination, to, you know, we're going to take care of our own. And, you know, and you saw in the Desire Housing projects, the Black Panthers set up a chapter. Initially, they were called the National Committee to Combat Fascism. So they were there because, you know, there was a need. There was police brutality happening. So the Panthers came in and were well respected, and were going to protect the community as it related to this police brutality. They also set up free breakfast programs, which we still see to this day. And I can remember going to the nursery in the project, which was, I mean, a great nursery and a great development for young children. You know, there was a lot of leaders. There was a woman named Ursula Spencer who volunteered to take the lead. In Press Park, there was a woman that was just shown with the high boots, Miss Florent. There was Jesse Turner, who started a Teach Your Brother program. So the community was cohesive, and the residents were discussing their own needs while seeking, you know, of course, funding from the ruling class, you know, apparatus, because, you know, we were really, were we even out of, no, I don't even believe we were out of Jim Crow. I don't believe we're out of Jim Crow today, but, you know, we really didn't have a lot of resources in the community, especially in this community. It was very rare that someone went to college, and it was a big deal, especially in the early 70s, late 60s. So needing to push further on that self-determination, the Black Panthers, you know, they were not quiet about what they were doing, and they came under surveillance by a couple of NOPD officers who infiltrated the organization. And you may have heard about the shootout in the Desire with the Panthers and the New Orleans Police Department. Even as far as Hollywood and New York City, Jane Fonda participated and assisted the Black Panthers with funding in order to get to conventions, like the convention in DC, where the Panthers were heading and were stopped by the NOPD. Some of that funding was by Jane Fonda. So now we see the free breakfast program. We see the pride in the area. We also see an increase in the consciousness of the people in the area. The people started to feel safe with that Panther protection. And here you see their headquarters on Piety Street, which is directly across the street from the Desire Project. So between 1974 and 78, Mayors Moon Landrieu and Dutch Morial's administration, they began to develop and market affordable home ownership opportunities for low-income families in a senior facility for elderly citizens at the site of the former Agriculture Street landfill. So in this act, we talk about Gordon Plaza, and that's from 1983 to 2020. So this is in contrast to that build up to that pride. And I like to say that the folks from this community are all, you might as well say that they're indigenous to this community, because the only people we know who have lived there before the actual residents are the students and the faculty at the school, the Gaudet School, or the colored school for colored children, or whatever. So here, the residents in Gordon Plaza after 1983, we see the ribbon cutting ceremony here. But what's happening is in 83, the residents are starting to find bottles, aerosol cans, and all sorts of contaminants. In 1986, lead and carcinogens were found at the newly built multi-million-dollar Moton School in 1983. The residents of Gordon Plaza filed suit at that time. In 1994, the area was deemed a Superfund site by the EPA in 1994. And right now, it's the second highest cancer-causing area in Louisiana, according to the National Cancer Registry. 2005, we had Hurricane Katrina. And in 2006, the residents won their lawsuit with a $44 million judgment against the city of New Orleans, Hano, and the New Orleans Public Schools. So what we had basically was, the American dream. Again, in 1993, the carcinogens were found in neighborhoods, in the neighborhood by the EPA when they did the testing. There was a remediation plan in 2001, and that was to remove 2 feet of topsoil that some of the residents allowed the EPA to dig around their homes, and that basically left them vulnerable to the steering of the toxins. Then we see Hurricane Katrina happen. So this was the part of it. This was if you see the sign here, you see the second reality to a vision, Gordon Plaza subdivision. You see all of the politicians here, attending the pumping circumstance type ceremonies. And on the left, we see Gordon Plaza with an aerial drawing. So you see the Press Park townhomes on the right. You see the subdivision where the residents of Gordon Plaza live on the left. And where the green space is, that's the undeveloped land that was also a part of the landfill. Up top is the area where the senior facility is located, and you see a drawing of it right here. So Hano managed Press Park, and these folks were forced to move out because the housing authority owned the property in which they lived. So this basically highlights the problematic nature of private property. So private property as rental income is housing for the profit of the homeowner. And it's problematic because it squarely leaves the human out of the ability for their own self-determination. But who should be responsible for this travesty that the Gordon Plaza residents would face for, more than 20 years at this point now? So it is important to note that none of these community members at this time were at the planning table when they decided to sanitize the city dump with carcinogens after 1948. Mayor Chet Morrison in the city of New Orleans was at fault for that. This community of Hano was planned by a man named Robert Bragnac and his partners, and they're at fault for deciding to cut costs and not apply the 18 inches of clean river sand as was deemed necessary to replace the landfill dirt. Regulations were overlooked in the interest of profits. So these are basically crimes, and the individuals responsible are criminals. So it's similar to the cost cutting for the construction of the Desire Housing Project, which caused a rapid dilapidation of the buildings in the project. If you're from New Orleans, you might remember that. So by the 1980s, the structures were falling apart. And that was partly because the project was built on a city dump, and the developers needed to cut the costs and the interest of these profits, and partly because it was on the landfill. So experts warned that these structures would not last. Other housing projects, like the one on the image was the Defeat Housing Project that Trev talked about, these structures were more solid, and they did not see the same dilapidation. So what we're seeing is a pattern. It's the rich ruling class, of course. They need to house their workers, but they fall short on providing sustainable resources for communities that don't have these resources. So again, it's important to note that these experiments are their experiments, but it's the people who are left to suffer and to find their own solutions. And then when the people attempt to find their own solutions, there's always regulation, there's red tape, there's pushback. Because of course, they don't want consciousness to be raised by the people because, they're worried about their profits. And if the people are smart, then it'll be a problem for them. So again, the people want to engage in their own self-determination and they want to be responsible for their own health. Just like the residents of Gordon Plaza, who today have been fighting for more than 30 years for a fully funded relocation off of this toxic land. But after Hurricane Katrina, the Desire projects closed. Again, the Press Park residents were not allowed to return to their homes. And this is why the residents have been fighting for so long. Community centers did not return. But the residents of Gordon Plaza, they had to go back because these are their homes. And they went back and they restored these homes because where else would they go? After they put their life savings into their property for themselves and even for generations to come. Let's see. So, of course, that became the American nightmare. Here you see a lot of digging, you see a lot of dilapidation. You see the Moton School, which is also dilapidated. There was carcinogens there. They went to do water testing by the New Orleans Sewage and Water Board, and they found high levels of lead there. Here you can see that this woman is digging very deeply, but she's coming up with all sorts of bottles and plastic, so on and so forth. So for the residents who came back, they did everything right. They paid their taxes, they educated their children, they kept up with the maintenance of their property and their community. And after Hurricane Katrina, finally, the lawsuit was settled in 2006. So the residents won their case, and these entities were ordered to pay the residents $44 million. And the city of New Orleans has yet to pay the rest of the settlement. However, half of the $14 million that was paid out would go to 5 attorneys. And the other 7 million of that 14 would go to the residents to split amongst themselves. And there was probably upwards of 1,000 residents who lived on this property and were a part of this lawsuit. So, the 5 attorneys were, and I like to say that these people are parasites because they're really preying on people. And in some cases, they're preying on their own people, like attorney Suzette Begnares. Her mother lived in the community, her stepmother lived in the community, and somehow she ended up being a part of the initial class which got their fair share. And there was 19 residents that got their fair share, which left the other residents out. So there was Linda Harang, Joseph Bruno, Stephen Murray, George Rue, and now the residents are still looking to get off of this toxic land because they can't sell their property because there's no value in toxic land. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. You hear bourgeois Negroes going around asking, well, why don't they just move? Well, this is their property. You want them to leave their property? And if they could sell their property for a fair value, then they could do that. But who's going to underwrite a loan for a property that's on toxic land? So, they've been puppet stringed along for far too long. And this is what the ruling class does when it is clear it's their responsibility to these working class people. So a fully funded relocation is not only deserved, but it's justified in the court of law and in humanity, as you know, any decent person could see that these residents are rightfully due a fully funded relocation off of this toxic land. So the residents of Gordon Plaza are demanding a fully funded relocation from the city of New Orleans and Mayor Cantrell. So the Carver Desire area is a shell of what it was. You know, most of the folks have relocated to other states or other parts of the city. The churches are gone, the project is gone, the community, everything is gone. There's one school there, but the pride remains, you know, and it can be found in these still well manicured lawns of the residents of Gordon Plaza in their subdivision. So, as well as in their, you know, their fight for their own self-determination and good health. So, you know, with that being said, that's what my mother, Mr. Jesse, Miss Edwina, Miss Shannon, and the residents of Gordon Plaza want. They want to determine what is best for them, and they have every right to demand that. So the interesting thing, there's another community in Mossville, Louisiana, which is in Calcasieu Parish, which is right outside of Lake Charles. And these folks are dealing with environmental racism as well. So in solidarity, the residents of Gordon Plaza stands with our brothers and sisters in Mossville, Louisiana, in their fight to be relocated. But the difference here is the Gordon Plaza residents moved to this toxic land that was unknowingly under them, and due to the negligence of the political class, the rich ruling class, who did not do their own diligence, depleted the community of resources when it was most needed in the 80s, when you saw a decline in urban areas, and, you know, will not assist with the problem that they created. So, but in Mossville, the difference is the pollutants came to them. It came over them, you know, it came while they were already there. So they, you know, put their property there. They decided to move in this community, and the pollution came to them. Whereas the residents of Gordon Plaza, the pollution was under them the whole time. And in researching this whole thing, I was able to understand how this community came to be. And really, it's indigenous to these people. These people are the indigenous people from this area. The only people who might have been before them, again, were the Native Americans who were living close to Bubancha or in Bubancha, if Bubancha, which was the name for New Orleans, spread that far. So yeah, we stand with them, and hopefully, you know, this shed some light on the residents of Gordon Plaza in a larger context, and we fight for a fully funded relocation.
Thank you, Derek. Yeah, I love hearing the story of Gordon Plaza because every time you hear the details, you understand more and more clearly. Like you said, that it's not like something, and it's not an ask at this point. Justice has been kind of overdue. So it's time, it's time, it's time, it's time. Thank you so much, Derek.
You're welcome.
So our next speaker is, and our last speaker is Gabby, who's going to talk to us about evictions and the unhoused. Gabby?
We
Hey,
actually
y'all.
got Garrison right before that.
Yeah.
Down. I'm so sorry. I scrolled past you, Garrison. So we're going to have Garrison and then Gabby. Garrison is going to talk to us about land reclamation in South Africa and beyond. Come on, Garrison. I'm so sorry.
Can everybody hear me? Everybody hear me? I'm gonna pull out one of those educator moves. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. Clap 3 times. I'm slick with it. I just woke y'all up. One, thank y'all so much for coming. Let me first thank Take 'em Down NOLA, the Big Bro Quest, General Angela, like all these people who brought me into this community, into this activist work, this revolutionary work. I want to thank y'all for this opportunity to come and speak to all these lovely, wonderful comrades today. So let's get started. Claiming power through land reclamation. So as revolutionaries, we understand that we do not have ownership of the land. We should not have ownership of the land, but we are stewards of the land. And in particular, our revolutionary fight at the moment against the capitalists is to remove their ownership of the land, because they have clearly proven countless times again and again that they are not good stewards of the land that we've been gifted on this planet. So therefore, it is up to the people to reclaim that land, repurpose that land, and remove things like statues to the false ideology of white supremacy, or as my big brother calls it, white inferiority, right? To remove toxic landfills, to remove toxic plants like those refineries out in Chalmette, right? It is our responsibility as the people to reclaim this land so that it can be used for the purpose and benefit of all peoples, because it is our responsibility to be stewards over that. So we're going to talk about 3 specific ways this land reclamation is happening. Just like my sister Angela brought up, there are different levels to this work that we do as revolutionaries. And we're going to explain those different levels in particular. And we're going to celebrate all of the victories of land reclamation, from the small victories to the major ones. And so let's get into it. So today we're going to talk about 3 specific ones. And I want to categorize the nature of these reclamations before we even get into the specifics. So the 3 areas we're going to talk about is, first, the Freedom Georgia initiative. It's been in the news recently. 19 Black families have bought up 97 acres of land to create their own independent township. Second, we're going to talk about the Shinnecock Indian Nation, the Shinnecock Indigenous Nation out in the Southamptons, who have recently won some court cases that have determined that the Southamptons and that land surrounding it is their indigenous and ancestral home, which is a big deal for the US federal government and for the New York state government to recognize that that land in its entirety belongs originally to the Shinnecock Nation. And last but not least, we're going to travel over to the motherland, to South Africa, to talk about the efforts of the economic freedom fighters and their revolutionary restructuring of the South African Constitution. So if you see those little black words next to those images, these are the levels we're going to be talking about today. And so these levels are the relationships of these actions to the system, right? So the Freedom Georgia Initiative is considered participation in the system, right? Like we said before in our groundings, and we've said before, and multiple speakers have spoke, is that as revolutionaries, we understand we shouldn't be owning the land. We don't have a right to own land. So the Freedom Georgia Initiative is participating in the system that has divvied up the land. They're buying the land from the bank, buying the land from other people who originally stole the land, as Angela put it, right? The Shinnecock Nation is participating in resistance, right? They are resisting the system that has told them that this land belongs to the wealthy elite of the Southamptons or to the state of New York, right? They're still taking ownership of the land, and their actions are not necessarily full-on reclamation through violence or through excessive force, right? But it is a resistance to the system that tells them who owns the land and how land should be owned. And then last but not least, the EFF in South Africa is participating in the restructuring of the system, right? So through their actions, through their political work, through their grassroots organizing, they are restructuring the literal government, the literal constitution of South Africa. And so we want to celebrate all of these victories, right? As revolutionaries, we don't want to always get caught up in the negatives. We want to celebrate the positives, because every victory brings us a little bit closer to that revolutionary day where we can celebrate and be collective stewards of the land. So we want to celebrate that while these may not be the traditional images we think of when we think about revolutionary reclaiming of the land, forceful reclaiming of the land, these small victories are victories nonetheless. Next slide, please. So let's start with the Freedom Georgia Initiative, victory in the Peach State, right? So these are some of our comrades over in Georgia who are part of those 19 families that have bought up 97 acres of land in the state of Georgia to establish their own independent community. Next slide. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we're going to read their mission statement really quickly. I'll read through it really fast. Our vision is to develop our vast resource-rich 96.71 acres of land in Tomsboro, Georgia, for the establishment of an innovative community for environmentally sustainable living, health and wellness, agricultural and economic development, arts and culture for generations to come. Healing from racial trauma. The Freedom Georgia Initiative was established out of an extreme sense of urgency to create a thriving safe haven for Black families in the midst of racial trauma, a global pandemic, and economic instabilities across the United States brought on by COVID-19. Building our own communities. We aim to be a premier recreational, educational, and cultural destination for Black families across the African diaspora. Right? So the goal of this land reclamation was for Black families and members of the diaspora to have a little slice of the pie, right? And arguably 96.71 acres of land is not a small slice, but comparatively to what we talk about when the ruling class has ownership of land, it is a small slice. But this is a victory for the Black nation and victory for all of us in our revolutionary struggle, because they are using the systems that are originally created to oppress us. They're using that system to create spaces in which African Americans, Africans, and other members of the diaspora, and eventually other members of other oppressed nations, can experience a level of peace and a level of stewardship that is universally not recognized, especially in this colonial border, in this colonial system. Next. So up next, the Shinnecock Nation, victory in the Hamptons. This is one of my favorite examples because, to put it lightly, right, it was a giant middle finger to the powers that be. Quite literally a giant middle finger to the powers that be. So if you click, Shinnecock Nation has been on the lands of the Southamptons for generations upon generations, before these colonizers could even conceptualize the idea of crossing the Great Ocean to go find new lands and new trade routes. And so it's the same old story that we consistently get in this hemisphere, that we consistently get in this realm, is that the Shinnecock, because of a wide variety of reasons, right, overwhelming masses of colonizers, the violence that colonizers brought into the area, the disease that was brought into the area, for whatever specific reason, the Shinnecock Nation made a deal with the powers that be at the time. And they were given, quote unquote, this land right here. If you see on that top photo, you see the Southamptons, and then you see the Shinnecock Indian Reservation and the Shinnecock Hills area. The Shinnecock Hills area is actually ancestral burial ground for the Shinnecock Nation, as well as other indigenous nations that exist in that area, right? It is sacred ground. There's a lot of rituals that were done in that area. There's a lot of ancestral burial grounds that are still very sacred and still very close to those people. And lo and behold, as per usual, Uncle Sam, doing what he does best, disrespects the ancestral home of these people and violates the treaty by running a railroad through the ancestral burial grounds of the Shinnecock Nation and forcing them onto this small plot of land next to the Southamptons, where we currently have the Shinnecock Indian Reservation, big air quotes, right? So we've seen this 1,000 times over and over and over again, right? It is almost standard, not almost, it is standard policy for the United States that they will create a treaty with you, and while they're drafting that treaty behind your back, they're drafting the plans to violate that treaty, right? This is something that we've seen other colonial powers do in the African continent and in Asia, where they create a plan that makes it seem like they're giving stewardship or ownership over land to indigenous peoples of that land, only to set them up for failure intentionally. Next slide. So this was the Shinnecock response, which, like I said, is one of my favorite responses when it comes down to land reclamation. So the first response was to physically occupy the land. I think the title of it was Solidarity Camp 2020. And so the tribal elders and leaders of the Shinnecock Nation, particularly there are 3 indigenous women who are leading the charge in the Southamptons, decided that they were going to occupy the land physically and invite other members of the Shinnecock Nation and other allies, and more importantly than allies, accomplices in their revolutionary struggle, to physically occupy the land, regardless of what the pigs said when they showed up in their bright, bright blue, right? And so they physically occupy the land to agitate not only the ruling class and the powers that be, but to directly agitate the residents of the Southamptons, which if you know anything about the rich ruling class, the Southamptons is one of their favorite places to vacation. They really love the view, and they got a bunch of views of revolutionary struggle right in their face of their front door. The second part of their response, got to turn my hat back for this one because this is my favorite. Their second part of their response is they built 2 ginormous, massive billboards, LED, highest quality, right, in the middle of the Southamptons, right? Actually, in the direct route that they have to take to even get to their vacation spots, right? So they blasted all kinds of stuff, revolutionary messages on here, but they also sold advertisement to fund the tribal government, right? To fund the indigenous nations government, because they do not have access to land trusts in the state of New York. And they're one of the many indigenous nations that we don't hear about because the federal government has left them behind because they're too small or whatever sad excuse that the American federal government comes up with. So this was their source, right, of income for the tribal nation. So what happens is, of course, the rich ruling elite call their cronies, call all their friends, and say, you know what, we're going to put down a lawsuit. They have to remove it. It's a blight. It's ruining the nature, right, as if they have any connection to the nature, right? And so what they did is they brought them to court in the Supreme Court of the state of New York. And in a revolutionary decision, in my opinion, the Supreme Court of the state of New York recognized that all of the land of the Southamptons, all of the land of Shinnecock Hills, all of the land of the Shinnecock Indian Reservation is the ancestral home of the Shinnecock Nation and several other indigenous nations, and that it was within their right, ancestral right, to place any type of building, any type of monument or monolith on that land, right? And while this sounds like it's still the system giving permission, it's still such a big deal for an oppressive system to recognize that not only one specific location, but overwhelmingly the majority of the land is the ancestral home of an indigenous peoples, and they have every right to use their land however they want, right? So this was a big victory, not only for the Shinnecock, but indigenous nations all over the United States who are currently struggling for access to the lands that they had been stewards of for generations. I really like that billboard. It's really my favorite way of pissing off the ruling class. Next slide. Now we got to go back, take it all the way back. We got to go home, right? Africa for Africans, victory in the Manzansi, right? And for those of you who are just learning this, just like I just learned this, Manzansi is a colloquial term in the Xhosa language. I hope I got my clicks right, which is the word for South. And they use it to denote that entire region of Southern Africa as their ancestral home. So in this picture, we have the current forefront, the vanguard of the revolution, in my opinion, out in South Africa, the economic freedom fighters on one of their parades. And as you can see, they chose a very specific color to represent their fight in South Africa. Next slide. So a little history about that region of Africa before we even get into the economic freedom fighters. So starting off, you have to honor the original indigenous peoples of that region, the Khoisan people. The Khoisan people are one of the oldest nations in the world, right? Their genetic materials is one of the first genetic materials to grace this planet. And they were the original inhabitants of Southern Africa. Then we see massive migrations take place from Western and Southwestern Africa. And we see Bantu peoples migrate into Southern Africa, which gives way to the nations that we now reference when we think about South Africa, the Zulu nation, the Xhosa nation, and many other nations of Bantu peoples that have migrated into Southern Africa. Then, here they come to ruin all the fun. European powers, specifically the British Empire, is the largest European power that invades the region. But more importantly, when we talk about the change from feudalism to capitalism, right, the change from monarchies to a business elite, the first multinational corporations also conquer this, let me not use the word conquer, claim and steal this land from the indigenous peoples. So we're talking about the Dutch India Company, the British East India Company, the British West Indies Company, all of these companies have a lot of their startup related to the trade that takes place in Southern Africa, including a very small portion, but a very important portion of the transatlantic slave trade. So fast forward, after these folks have colonized this region, we have the apartheid government. This is what a lot of us know about South Africa. We think of apartheid and we think of Madiba, Nelson Mandela, who was one of the freedom fighters that helped liberate this region from the apartheid government. Fun fact, if you didn't know, most of you probably already know, the apartheid government originally used the greatest playbook of white supremacy known to mankind, written by yours truly, Uncle Sam, and was sponsored by the American government in their actions to practice one of the worst forms of segregation in human history. Fast forward a little bit more, we get a lot of freedom struggles in a lot of different variety of ways, some peaceful, some non-peaceful, but they won't teach you about the non-peaceful ones. And we see the African National Congress, the ANC, take power, big air quotes, take power in South Africa and liberate, bigger air quotes, the people of South Africa to form a rainbow coalition government, and everybody's happy and everything's okay. And that's what they tell you in your history books. But in reality, we know that's not the truth. A lot of folks, especially on the left side of the revolutionary struggle in South Africa, feel that the ANC sold out to build their own comfort, right? Because if you actually look at it, roughly about 1/3 of South Africa's land is under private ownership. Amongst that private ownership, roughly about 70%, give or take the estimate, 70% of that private land is owned by the white descendants of Europeans that colonized that land. Mind you, they only make up 10% of the total population of the nation of South Africa. And that ain't right. So along comes the real vanguard of the revolution, the economic freedom fighters. So the economic freedom fighters are some of the most wild, brash, revolutionary freedom fighters I've seen in my short time on this planet. They do not care what you think. They do not care how you feel. All they care about is that the people of South Africa will have economic freedom and have economic determination and self-determination over the land of their ancestors. So here's Julius Malema, who is the leader and founder of the Economic Freedom Fighter. I would like to caution everybody, just as a quick aside, one thing we have to be careful, especially folks like myself who are still very new to the revolution, we have to be careful not to engage in hero worship, right? Julius Malema is a vanguard member of the EFF, but he's also a human being that has complex opinions, and sometimes he can be a little off on the wrong side of the revolution, but we love the brother anyways. So the EFF recently, through elections and grassroots organizing, has forced the South African government to re-begin the process of expropriation of land by the way of amending the Constitution from white farmers. Another element of their platform is pushing to nationalize resources. The EFF overwhelmingly is supported by the young population of South Africa. They've galvanized populations that traditionally were not voters, populations that traditionally were left out of the government, and galvanized them to increase their standing in the political process. And in particular, they are very, very representative of the working class, particularly the miners of South Africa, one of the most forgotten populations. That's actually why they wear those red jumpsuits and also wear red hard hats to represent their solidarity with the miners who are the backbone of South Africa's economy. And they want to nationalize that specific area for the purpose of making sure they have rights to the land. You can go on to the next slide. Had a little quick flash. So here are just two other examples, one stateside and one abroad, of land reclamation fights that are currently taking place. In the north, up in Canada, our indigenous brothers and sisters are waging a very, very intense conflict, which has spilled over into actual violence in Nova Scotia over control of the fisheries on their ancestral land. We've seen multiple different approaches where there's been direct violence perpetrated by the government and perpetrated by private forces against the indigenous peoples. And we've seen indigenous peoples also return the favor as they should. We've also seen indigenous peoples in Nova Scotia use the system and buy up ownership of a major corporation that controlled the fisheries. And they now control elements of the fisheries that are on their ancestral land. Another example here stateside is ACE, the Alternatives for Community and Environment, which is a Black organization in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Shout out to B-Town, Boston, one of my favorite places that I've been. The Black community out there and the Dominican community out there go hard in the paint for the revolution. So they have a current initiative called Grow or Die, and they've been forcefully taking over vacant land in their neighborhoods and turning it into community accessible gardens and feeding their community members without the permission of the Boston government, which later forced the Boston government to create land trusts controlled by the Alternatives for Community and Environment. So these are just a few examples of how the revolutionary struggle continues and how, despite what the media would have you believe, despite what the ruling class would have you to believe, we are obtaining victories in this struggle. We have momentum, and it's up to us as the people to reclaim stewardship of the land and continue this momentum and continue this revolutionary struggle. Ashe.
Ashe, thank you, Garrison. We're going to keep moving right along to Gabby.
Thanks, Vana. That was great, Garrison. That was so good. First, I'll extend my gratitude to my comrades here for putting together this great forum and giving us all a chance to listen to each other and to get situated, grounded, and to frame ourselves for what we're all going through right now. So this talk is going to be on housing, evictions, and the unhoused, and it's a local and national glance into the housing crisis during the global pandemic. Here is a little outline of how I'm breaking it down. It's not in the exact order, but these are things that I want to touch on. A picture of me in front of some art. My name's Gabby, and I use they, them pronouns if you need to address me. You can go to the next. So pre-pandemic, I wanted to paint a picture of what the houseless situation and evictions and the crisis was like before March and we had lockdown. So before March, there was 211,000 people experiencing homelessness or houselessness on the streets, and another 356,000 people living in emergency shelters, and more than 2.7 million people living in overcrowded housing conditions. So all of these populations are at a higher risk of becoming ill because they cannot isolate. And we know that people of color face greater mortality risks just from the early research done on the virus. And this is due to pre-existing structures such as lack of access to healthcare, greater exposure in low-wage frontline jobs, and limited or discriminatory housing practices, and being unhoused or underhoused. And this disproportionately affects people of color, with Black Americans accounting for 13% of the whole US population in 2019, but 40% of all people experiencing homelessness. So this systemic shortage of affordable housing has been going on for more than a decade across the nation. And with the pandemic, we know that we need significant emergency rental assistance in the short run, just to keep low-income renters housed. And this is a public health issue, of course. But in the long run, we need a deep, sustained commitment to the National Housing Trust Fund, housing choice vouchers, and public housing to make affordable renting a reality for more people. At its current funding levels, federal housing assistance is only available to 1 in 4 eligible low-income households. And then throughout the rest of this presentation, we can look at what some changes might be in the long run and also how we can help our neighbors today. So looking at the future, in a normal year, and we don't want to go back to normal because still violent and terror on people of color, but in a normal year, there would be about 4 million eviction cases filed in the US. Current recent census data just from this year puts about 29 to 43% of renters in the country that could face eviction by the end of the year, with the federal eviction moratorium lifting on December 31st. And that is about 30 to 40 million people, with predicted by January 1st, that first day after the eviction moratorium lists, it's predicted that about 5 to 6 million eviction cases are going to be filed on that day alone. So more than what we would think as like a normal year in the US. And this is just going to bring a tidal wave of increase in poverty, houselessness, more COVID cases. It's unimaginable right now. And it's imperative that we are clear in our solidarity with the working class, whether unhoused or housed, and that we are clear on who the perpetrators of these systems of oppression are, and the many factors that situate single Black mothers as the most targeted individuals in the struggle. And I put protect Black women here on this slide because it felt appropriate. And yeah, women, we all know, get lower wages. Black people especially. I want to show y'all a little more of the visuals here so we can situate ourselves. So we got low wages and rising rent. This is from an article on NOLA.com in July, quoted that people looking for a 2-bedroom apartment in New Orleans need to earn $20.73 an hour to live comfortably. And this is based on something called fair market rent, which places that you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your monthly income on your rent, including utilities. And this is an affordable price. Now, the graphic on the left is from 2019, and it shows the federal minimum wage in comparison to what you would need to be making an hour in New Orleans to afford that 2-bedroom. And let's say you are a parent and you're in a 2-parent household, and you are working, you can't afford childcare, so one parent has to stay home. That means there's one person in this family home, and you might need to work, if you're working a federal minimum wage job, you need to work 3 full-time jobs to afford that. And forget, raising your children or having dreams or gardening or vacations. You're just working to afford this home. Disgusting is right. Disgusting. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Let's get to this next slide because we got a lot. Meanwhile, this is a meme that's been circulated, Antoinette. I think you shared it this week, and I just was inspired to communicate that hourly wages over the past, what would this be, 40 years for the lowest wage workers has only raised 1.6%. in 40 years. Meanwhile, the highest wage workers, their wages have raised by 37.6%. And conversely, rent has raised by 37% since 1980. So I want my pizza, I want to have an affordable life, but why is it just because these guys are making more money? Like, where's that redistribution, right? We're being robbed. So let's see in the whole US what you need to make to get that 2-bedroom lifestyle. So in Louisiana, the state hourly wage is $17.48, but if we look at the county breakdown of this United States map at the next slide, we can see in the densely populated areas that you need to work more than 80 hours a week. And that's pretty much the same wherever you are in the country if you're in a metropolitan zone. So we can take a look closer at the Louisiana breakdown at this next. Yeah. So the state housing wage is at $17.48, but in the lower left box, you can see the most expensive area is New Orleans Metairie, with the housing wage being $20.73. And you can read through this. This is all from the National Low Income Housing Coalition's 2020 report called Out of Reach. They put it out every year, and they break it down by state. It's very informative, also very depressing, depending on how you're going into this research. Yeah, so you can sit down with that if you want to look at it more, but we can keep moving on for the sake of time. This is a New Orleans specific graph that breaks down the increase or decrease in wages from the year 2000 to 2014 based on race or ethnicity. So the gray bar is the year 2000 and the green bar is 2014. And the white workers, their wages went up 9% in those 14 years, whereas for people of color, it's just stagnant pretty much, with the Latino population actually going down 10 cents. Who made that up? Okay, so people of color are disproportionately facing these challenges because they have lower wages. So it's even harder to get affordable housing. And there are so many other practices that contribute to this, but the discrepancy between white and people of color workers and their wages just exacerbates these issues. And then when we think back to what Trev was saying with redlining and gentrification, we know that with the damage done by the flooding, that there was less affordable housing. So the demand hiked up the rents. And since 2005, rents in New Orleans have increased by 50%. With 35% of that discrepancy happening by 2006. So the next slide shows the spike in rent from 2005 to 2006, and you can see it leading up from 2000 until 2006. And this, like I gagged when I saw this. Great, thank you. So this all ties into gentrification and back to what we were saying, because there's a proven, it's been like people have taken the time to prove this, that there is a correlation between neighborhoods that received damage, flood damage during the capitalist disaster of 2005 and their likelihood of being gentrified in the coming decade. And we were talking about before, I think Aretha put in the comments that, you know, New Orleans East, okay, like we see these red, so I'll explain this map that you see. The darker red means a higher concentration of poverty in those neighborhoods. And there are little like black eyelashes that you kind of see strewn about. Those are subsidized housing units. And then there's like a white checkered cross stitching overlaid. And that white part is where flooding happened during Katrina. And you see it's overlapped with the subsidized housing and higher poverty levels in those areas. And 80% of the residents in these flooded areas were non-white. And so, like I was saying, a loss of those affordable housing units, higher rents, gentrification, urban renewal, ... Next slide. So, in 2011, the city of New Orleans announced a 10-year plan to functionally end houselessness. This was a plan to that was updated in 2016 under the Landreau administration. So 2016, 5 years, 2021. Let's see how they measured up, right? So this is a table I pulled from the Landreau report where they were stating what they wanted to do and what their goals are and how they were going to do it. So they say number of units we want to do by 2021. Here's how we're going to do it, blah, 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 blah. We want to have 7,500 new affordable housing units by 2021. But in reality, we can know, now we know we're actually losing housing. So next slide, I think I read that there's this year alone, I guess in the past 10 months, we've lost over 350 affordable units in town, with over 670 in the past 2.5 years. So we're going down. The city only got close to meeting its 1,500 new units a year goal for that first year after 2016, but has just decreased since. So what's up with that when we're in a global pandemic that requires housing to determine public health? And this rapidly intensifying housing crisis is just exacerbated by a city governed by those who prioritize a business and tourist economy over housing. And I want to talk more about how egregious that is when we look at who are these houseless people in New Orleans. So the unhoused in New Orleans, I'm not going to read the text on the screen because this is just quotes from an interview by Martha Cagle, who's the director at Unity New Orleans, and they are pretty much given the baton to keep a record of the number of houseless people that are in New Orleans at any given point in time. So this is her first hand experience in the past few months about coronavirus and first-time houseless people, and this, she's calling it a compounding the constant churn of homelessness, but we say houseless community. But on the left, I put a flyer of a sweep. So this was probably put down under the Pontchartrain Expressway. It's just giving houseless community 24 hours notice saying, we're gonna lift all your stuff if it's not gone here because we have to clean the streets. Clean the streets. Something about coronavirus, blah, blah, blah. When really we know that contact with the police and just like outside people is gonna exacerbate spread of the virus, but also this has so many intersections because the people who are houseless right now, so many of them who are newly houseless, were working in the French Quarter. If you click ahead 2 slides. Yeah. So this quote says the outreach team of Unity is reporting that a lot of people formerly employed in the hospitality industry are now living on the street, particularly people who were employed in the French Quarter. That's a lot of what they're seeing, people who worked in restaurants and hotels. And the picture here is that new fence that got put up under Claiborne like just 2 months ago, I think. And the city spent like $250,000 on it just to scoot some houseless people to another part of town. They're gonna move them around like a sliding puzzle for however many years because they want to keep this tourist vision of New Orleans when who is it that is homeless or houseless right now? It is Black people, it's people of color, it is the musicians, it's the entertainers, it's the cultural bearers, it's the hospitality workers. So these low-wage people who are mostly African American, don't we all know that New Orleans has its tourist appeal because of its African diasporic roots? So the people who built this place, who are indigenous to Bobancha, are getting priced out and put on the street, and they're more vulnerable to the virus. And you just want to clean up their camps and say that that is your like public health duty or some, oh, it's gross. So moving on. Thanks for being my clicky friend. Affordable housing, back to that. Like I was saying, a lot of the new houseless or first-time houseless people are French Quarter, performers, hospitality workers, and the little graphic here on the left I pulled from that Landreau report, and it says that 30% of local musicians make only $10,000 a year. And furthermore, 12% of full-time year-round workers in New Orleans Metro earn less than $17,500 per year. And we know that's like an arbitrary marker of poverty. So just less are living in poverty, which is compared to only 8% nationally. And we know women earn less. And according to 2013 census data, more than 64,000 working women in New Orleans were also living in poverty, working either full-time or part-time. And furthermore, Black New Orleanians are situated in even bleaker situations. And then in New Orleans, we have 52% of our population are renters. In this whole state of Louisiana, it's 35%. In New Orleans, 52% of people are renters, with 36% of those people paying more than 50% of their monthly income on housing, me being one of them. I feel like this has been, my life for years, and I still am working like 2 full-time jobs and I can't get it together. And so I live this, right? I'm sure there's more than just one of us who can be like, yeah, I'm scared, right? Anyway, solidarity to y'all. So next slide. Woohoo, luxury apartments. Trev touched on this, but I needed to throw this pic in there to be like, y'all remember when? Anyway, this was in the Twin Cities this summer in the uprising. These were gonna be, new apartments in the historic part of the city. Y'all smell that? All right. Next. Yum. We out here. All right, luxury apartments. So the private market fails to provide a sufficient supply of affordable housing to the lowest income renters. We know this. In New Orleans, this is the luxury condos in the CBD. These are, people will think about like the STRs, your short-term rentals, but basically your most new rental housing in the private market is built for high-income renters. So in order to turn a profit, this is all to turn a profit after they're paying their high development costs. Property taxes in New Orleans, insurance, construction, all that after 2005 has a play with it. I don't even want to touch that right now, but you got demolition and replacement of public housing, stuff that's damaged, plus high-end luxury apartments, and you get the affordable housing crisis in a nutshell. It's much more complex than that, but with stuff like protective zoning, mandatory low-income unit policies, you could get an increased number of affordable rental units for your low-income residents. And places like San Francisco have done this. I think it could be a good idea, especially protective zoning when we're thinking about Airbnbs, but who knows? I will talk about that another day. Next one. Ooh, okay, and just to give a image of slumlords, slime lords, your landlord, however you want to refer to them, I pulled this picture from a blog that really dug me deep, and I think that imagery of like all the keys, you can just turn them out. Tenants are just replaceable, right? So these are landlords that prey on the working poor. They know that there is an affordable housing shortage. So they know that they have leverage over you and that they're just going to take your money for the first few months. But then as soon as you stop paying, they're not even going to bother with trying to work it out with you. They're going to actually exploit you, take you to eviction court and get more money from you and your debts and the interest, and then just do it to another person. And all these power dynamics are exacerbated by poorly kept units where you don't feel like you can say to your landlord, oh, hey, the roof's leaking, because they're going to be like, oh, yeah, and you're late on rent or something like that. Or you're not a US citizen even. It could get even worse than this. And there's a really powerful report done by the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center on discriminatory rental practices in the Gulf South, with some case studies done in New Orleans just recently in the past few years. And they looked at 75 cases of renters trying to, get a spot. And 43 out of the 75 cases, African-American people reported discriminatory practice or just outright refusing to rent, things of that nature. And I thought one of the worst things when I was reading this was that they give white tenants discounts, which just further compounds how people of color have a worse time finding affordable housing. Yeah, and when you get evicted, when your landlord says, oh, to hell with you, oh, you're breaking the lease or you don't have payment, then I'm going to evict you. And I think before I started researching this, I didn't have it totally clear in my head that eviction is not so much a symptom of poverty as a cause of it, especially as a parent. Next, please. Then I found this beautiful poem by Langston Hughes that I would love if Quest animated and activated for us.
All right, I'm gonna give it the best I got. It's my first time looking at this.
Beautiful.
All right, Mafeti Funfi Gungun, highest reverence to the ancestor Langston Hughes. This is Ballad of the Landlord. Thank you, Gabby, for the opportunity to bring him into the space. Landlord, landlord, my roof has sprung a leak. Don't you remember I told you about it way last week? Landlord, landlord, these steps is broken down. When you come up yourself, it's a wonder you don't fall down. $10 you say I owe you? $10 you say is due? Well, that's $10 more than I'll pay you till you fix this house up new. What? You're gonna get eviction orders? You're gonna cut off my heat? You're gonna take my furniture and throw it in the street? You talking high and mighty. Talk on till you get through. You ain't gonna be able to say a word if I land my fist on you. Police, police, come and get this man. He trying to ruin the government and overturn the land. Coppers whistle, patrol bell, arrest, precinct station, iron cell. Headlines impressed. Man threatens landlord. Tenant held no bail. Judge gives Negro 90 days. Up in county jail.
Thank you, Quest. There's just a bit more here. So in New Orleans, evictions thus far. Anybody can correct me if I don't get these dates exactly right. I was cross-referencing while looking this up, but apparently, or from what I know, until the middle of June, New Orleans residents were protected by a temporary eviction moratorium that banned new filings and the proceedings of hearings. That ban lifted for private property in June, with federally subsidized housing still being protected until the end of July. In the first 2 days after that initial ban was lifted, about 70 eviction cases were filed. This is in the New Orleans First City Civil Court. And the local clerk, Austin Baden, says, or he's been quoted saying that he's preparing for a massive influx of filings come January 1st, so much so that he's extending his hours. So, lest we forget that it's already, with my friends that are doing the eviction court monitoring, they're saying that it's, single Black mothers. I haven't done that personally myself, but I need to think more about how I can be a support, whether it's doing more childcare or food justice. But that is going to be people we need to be in solidarity with immediately in the coming months in New Orleans. All right, next slide. Ooh, I'm excited. So this here, I hope it comes through. I tried to embed a video for y'all of, Yeah, Mickey, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Uh-oh. But I had a video of the direct action. Yeah, you're pulling it. The direct action at the end of July here at the First City Civil Court, where comrades, accomplices all came around to create a blockade to evict the courts. And all of that was incredibly inspiring. A lot of people across the country and beyond were saying, hell yeah, we love what you're doing. We're gonna do the same thing. And I think it was a wonderful action. Let's pull it up because we got some Gordon Plaza shirts in here. This guy, he tried to get in twice. He changed shirts. There's multiple videos of him trying to get through. That was, from everything I've seen, intense, a little bit confusing, but powerful day, a successful day, an act of resistance where no evictions were had. I know those evictions did get postponed later, but ultimately that level of solidarity is what we gotta be centering around. Which brings me to one of my last points, that evictions are state-sanctioned murder. And I'm gonna back this up with a little bit of numbers and data. And before, someone was asking me, because murder is like a huge, or maybe not a huge, but it is a leap from just plain old violence and terror. And I really do think that evictions are state-sanctioned murder. And just recently, researchers across the country found that lifting state moratoriums and allowing eviction proceedings to continue has caused as many as 433,700 excess cases of COVID-19. So unneeded, unnecessary cases of COVID-19, and 10,700 unnecessary additional deaths just from March to September. And there were eviction moratoriums in 43 states. And this was, put in place because at one point it was estimated that this pandemic could displace 40 million people. New research shows that when these bans were lifted, cases of the virus surged because people didn't feel safe to stay in their home anymore because they knew if they couldn't pay rent, then they get evicted, and nobody wants to be houseless. So they work and they risk their lives because somebody's just not willing to say, switch the button, let's keep these people housed. So yeah, just that information, like I said, January 1st, looking at an estimated 5 to 6.5 million pending evictions. Next slide, please, thank you. And with all of this happening, we still have just dreams happening. So keeping space for the dreams. Land back. The land back movement has been so beautiful to kind of melt into this summer. So one thing that non-Black and non-Indigenous people can do to materially support the land back movement is to pay rent, paying monthly or annual rent to Indigenous people whose land that you occupy. And when I found out about this, I was like, is this just another way of reifying oppressive systems? But not necessarily. It's an act of resistance. It's kind of conforms with the systems that have been in place, but this way you can build, as a non-Indigenous person, you can build authentic relationships with the tribes that, or the original stewards of the land that you live on, and you give back these resources so that Indigenous people can create and build a community of justice that, you know, they envision. And I have some links for all of these before I go a little deeper, but another land trust that I found is the Sogorea Te Land Trust, which was founded in 2012, not 2015, by Corinna Gould and Janella LaRose. And this is in the so-called San Francisco Bay Area on Chochenyo and Kerkin lands. With land trusts being nonprofit organizations that acquire land in order to help protect it. So Indigenous women run, and land trusts can have many different shapes and sizes, but this was one that I felt connected to. And then here in New Orleans, we have the House of Tulip, and they have a fundraising gala online on Friday that you can go to their Instagram if you want to be a part of that to help them raise money. But House of Tulip New Orleans is a trans-founded and trans-led land trust, a community land trust that is created to purchase a multi-family property for trans and gender non-conforming people in New Orleans, with this all being an initiative to have an inheritance for trans and gender non-conforming people, to protect them from houselessness because they're vulnerable. And it's helping with mental health. You know, like, trans women of color are given a very short prescribed life expectancy, and we need to, you know, really intentionally pave ways of thriving for trans women of color. And GLITZ, another program in Queens, New York, that is trans run and trans centered, they have accomplished buying the first housing complex owned by the trans community for the trans community, and they have a priority of housing Black trans sex workers. So that is in Queens. And then here as well in New Orleans, we have the Cole Williams Band, along with Artivism Dance and the New Orleans Citizens Relief Team. They have seized property in Central City on Proyer and Johnson, I think. And they're currently rebuilding that property with the unhoused community members that will be living in it. So that is land back in action. And Chris Light in the 9th Ward as well, a light being, Indigenous Black trans New Orleanian who was facing eviction and had sent out a ask to community to support them against that. Currently, I know that the eviction has been postponed, so that is a victory. Yet just that call alone to bring awareness to the seizure of his ancestral land has, you know, reopened the land back conversation specific to New Orleans, Black community, Indigenous and trans community, and all these intersections. And at the side of this slide, I put abolish carceral geographies, because it's all of this, like prison abolition is part of this public health, is part of this housing. And in New Orleans, why are we talking about funding a phase 3 jail for $325 million when we just need to build affordable housing units? Like, we don't want to continue to exacerbate all of these issues that I've kind of been circling around by further oppressing the Black population. All right, T, next slide. So last but not least, imperialist implications of all of this, because if you're a renter, you got your landlord, and your landlord's maybe, well, I don't know, down your throat maybe, but that landlord has their property and they have their mortgage, and they, you know, default on their mortgage. The bank is who we all kind of have to be turning our eyes to, because the banks are the ones that are going to seize this land when none of us can pay ultimately. And this is kind of going back into like 2007, 2008 territory, when you had, yeah, bring it home. All right. I will. You know, imperialism is, it's not a new concept to me, but I'm still wrapping my brain around it. So as I was putting this together, I had that moment from Love and Hip Hop, like, what the fuck, this shit is in different areas. So I had to like bring that in there, because it's true. With our land, or with property owners, people who have mortgage, if they are defaulting on their loans and they can't pay and they have debts, the bank is going to turn that inactive money into active capital that builds profit. And this is through a process called loan securitization, and they will repackage all your interests and all that and sell it away to investors. And this is money that imperialists use to, you know, have little tea parties with other imperialist countries and shit. So that's the best way I can say that. I will in time be more fluent in my structuring of the imperialist, you know, critical analysis, and not the imperialist tea. Yes. So I hope that all that information can sink in time. It's a lot. And, you know, Trev said it, been researching this for like 3 weeks. So however I wrapped it up with a bow or not, I'm walking away with some powerful information. And I want us to not feel alone in this, essentially. And I don't feel alone tonight, thanks to y'all. So blessings.
Thank you, Gabby. This is a lot, y'all. Before I open it up to questions, Trev had one last thing she wanted to wrap up for us, but I'm going to open it up. If you have a question, we're gonna have take some questions. So go ahead and put them in the chat. And Trev, you go ahead.
I'm so sorry, y'all. I got really caught up and I got really passionate, and I never gave the straight definition of redlining. So those bank loans that I was talking about, when the government gave those bank loans, there were areas, and on the map, they were blue and green for areas that had white people. They were yellow and red for areas that had minorities and immigrants. And an interesting fact is that even if one Black person lived in an area, like when I was talking about blockbusting, they made that a red line area. And that's the map. That was the graphic on the flyer. And now we kept reiterating, and I'm so sorry. I just got passionate and forgot to define the first thing I was talking about. So thank you.
Thank you, Trev. You did a great job. Everybody did a great job. Can we let Mickey back in? They got booted out. We're asking to share the slides. Quest hopefully can do that in our follow-up email. Speakers, if you have resources that you want to drop in the chat for books that we want to read, because we're trying to get this political lens like pew pew, ready, clear, laser light. Um, so any questions? Everybody was super thorough, and I really wish we had time to just like let everybody say a thing. But I don't know if we got till 11 o'clock. That's probably what it'd be looking like, right? So if we don't have any questions, I'm seeing some references come in. I was just about to say what Net dropped in the chat. Save this chat for your future references. If nobody has any questions or a quick thing, we're going to go right into our call to action. I appreciate y'all staying present. This was a lot of information, but it didn't even really feel long to me because it was like, it was so good. I appreciate y'all. So well connected. Make all the connections from the local to the global. We know what it is. So, who's doing the call
Yes.
to
Can
action?
you all give some virtual love to all of our speakers, all of our presenters who put so much time and energy into this for this communal learning experience? And I just really want to say that each moment in time and each thought and contribution that was offered into this space today is really for the intention of ensuring that we are grounding ourselves and we're able to share with each other and we're able to grow again communally. We are at a place right now where we're practicing new ways of being so that as we reclaim the land, we can make sure that we can show up on the land, allow the land to nurture us and nurture the land. And in order for us to do that, we have to revisit our relationship to the land, which means we have to revisit our relationship to each other. So in moments in time where we're having challenged or being challenged by each other, there's still an opportunity to grow and evolve. And as we grow and evolve, we're going to find that there are going to be challenges and difficulties along the way. And we can handle those challenges in new ways. We can problem solve in new ways. We can course correct in new ways. And it doesn't have to be punitive, but it absolutely has to be transformative. And we know how to do that. We know how to do that. And in the ways where we don't, we get the opportunity to practice right now and teach ourselves and teach each other. So I just want to show some more love to everybody who shared today and presented in this space. So let's talk about some call to action. Okay. Number one, I think Gabby made it very clear that this is a moment in time where we get an opportunity to practice solidarity now, right? And so as we're looking around and we're listening to our fellow community members and the struggles that are transpiring, we have to know that there's ways for us to step up and show up for each other in real and tangible ways. And so while we have to be mindful of the things that might call our attention in the here and now, we also have to be constantly educating, agitating, and organizing. There are some examples of resistance that were shared tonight. And when we think about all those examples of resistance, those things didn't happen overnight. People have been plotting, planning, organizing together. And as you got a chance to see from many of the presentations, these capitalists, they got 10-year plans, they got 20-year plans, they got 25, 40, 50-year plans. They've already colonized an area and declared what they're going to do for the next 100 years. So if we call ourselves having a revolutionary spirit, we can't just be jumping from day to day talking about what we're going to do tomorrow, guys. We have to be prepared to educate, agitate, and organize. And if we don't have the information, let's seek it out. We don't have to have it for ourselves. Somebody's going to have it and we're going to be able to share with each other. But there's a whole lot of information that is already embedded in us through our lived experience. How much more does a person have to give you a PowerPoint presentation, book, or article to read for you to know that you are deserving of housing, that you are deserving of food, that you are deserving of clean water? And if you're deserving of all those, how are we not to believe that other people are deserving as well, right? And so the only people that we don't have any concern with right now are those who know very intentionally and deliberately that they are exploiting masses of people. In the middle of COVID, you are making billions of dollars off of other people suffering. We have no sympathy for you, but we have sympathy for each other. We have compassion for each other. We have a recognition for each other in a way where we have to remember that even the things that divide us sometimes We have more in common with each other than we will ever have with these capitalists and these imperialists. So as long as we can remember that, it puts us in the best position to work toward what's to come. So I'm going to start in the month of March and work backwards, because for those of you who will hang around with us for long periods of time, and we hope that you will, we got plans for down the line. The things that are transpiring with Take Them Down NOLA are conversations we had 3 to 5 years ago. And we're able to see the manifestation of things that people told us we were crazy for even pursuing, that we were wasting our time doing things that weren't that important. But we always can see the connection between symbols and systems. They're in our face all the time, and we're choosing to take action on them. And they may not always move as fast as we want, but that means that we have a responsibility to educate, agitate, and organize more people to accelerate the movement. Because no matter what we do practically, we know at the end of the day, it's not just a physical war, it's an ideological war. And as long as we are constantly doing this work, we're gonna grow together. So in the month of March, we have something called International Working Women's Day. I know the slide is not up, but we're gonna email this stuff out. And we're asking you to save the date, March 6th. We're gonna be building movement work toward March 6th, because we live in a state that's paying people $7.25, and there are people in workplaces making less than $7.25. And folks can't survive off that. So we could decide to keep turning a blind eye because somebody is paying us more than $7.25 and we feel like we're better off for today. Or we could say our collective liberation is necessary. And even though when the wages increase, and we need them to increase, we still can't be satisfied with that, because the system that exploits is going to continue to exploit and just give us a few more crumbs. So that's in March. We're asking you to join us, be a part of this work. We're going to continue to share, and we want you to be a part of organizing toward that date. And then right around the corner, January 22nd through the 24th is going to be the Revolutionary Artist Weekend. Take Them Down NOLA is getting ready to host the 3rd annual Revolutionary Artist Weekend. And the reason that was started almost 3 years ago was because we understood that while we have a capitalist structure, there's a superstructure. There's a superstructure that is working on our minds daily. It's happening in the churches. It's happening through the propaganda, through the media. It's happening all around us. And the only way we can counter that is by having our revolutionary activity, word, and education go through. And this is an example, one of many ways that we engage in this work. And so all of the artists, we want you to come to the table and be fed with this revolutionary work, and we want you to be able to lean on one another and remind ourselves that what we produce doesn't have to be commodified and profitized. It doesn't have to always be for somebody else's profit. That we can ensure that we are using our talents, skills, and abilities in ways that we are reclaiming as well. And so when we think about that, we have revolutionary artists such as Tina and Bonner that are in the space, who've been doing this work for the last few years and organizing revolutionary artists. And there's so much that happens during that weekend. The first year, we had Emory Douglas, Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party, come, and we're engaging in this intergenerational work so that we can learn from those who have already done the work and are still doing the work. And we understand that there's nothing that we're doing that hasn't been done before. We're just assessing the current conditions and doing it in the ways that we need to. And then last year, we had an opportunity to honor ancestor Amiri Baraka, and we celebrate Amiri Baraka, but if you don't know Amina Baraka, his wife, you need to get to know her because she had a revolutionary spirit beyond measure. So this year we have a surprise for you all, and we just want you to stick with us. Right before that weekend kicks off, we have something called J20 NOLA. And that J20 NOLA is actually when and where the birth of the People's Assembly came about. Because rather than sitting around and having a woe is me party when Trump was elected, we decided to organize and have our own inauguration for our own unity and the work that's happening here in this area. And that was Trump, right? So some people are under the impression that things are going to be so much better under Biden, but we were organizing just as hard under the Black Barack Obama Democrat president as we have been. And so we understand that the face may change, but the conditions are still the same. And until those conditions change, we have work to do. And then we want to call your attention to saving the date for December 19th. If you're following any of the organizers that are on the line, or you're following the People's Assembly page or the Take 'em Down NOLA page, we ask that you pay attention, because on Saturday, December 19th, we are going to be congregating at 3 p.m. and we are going to announce the location for that day that we're going to congregate, because we're going to take a little tour around the city, and we would love for you to join us on the tour. So save the date, mark the time, and please understand that while there's some people who would say, you know, the Gordon Plaza situation has been going on for decades now. Why are you all focused on that? There's so many other things. Well, that's the same thing that they said with the monuments. And now you've got a whole community of Black working class people. So you participate in a Black Lives Matter uprising and don't understand the connection of why we're fighting for Black lives while they yet live in Gordon Plaza. There's a disconnect. If we're fighting for land and housing, Gordon Plaza represents all of that. If we're fighting for health and well-being, Gordon Plaza represents all of the issues that we say we're so concerned about. If you're saying you're fighting for reproductive justice, do you know how many women in Gordon Plaza and childbearing people in Gordon Plaza have lost their children or not been able to become carriers of their own seeds because of living on toxic soil? I could do this all day. So I just want us to know that this is an opportunity for us to practice fighting for reparations. This is an opportunity for us to practice having Black people not be forced off their land, but expect in the name of self-determination to be paid for the housing that is toxic because of the homes that were built for them on toxic soil. And then they can choose to go wherever they want. And when all of the people are safely removed from that toxic land, then the people can come back and reclaim the land to be able to clean it up and make it what it needs to be, because only Indigenous people, only Black people, only people who care about the earth and have a relationship to the earth would know how to engage and heal the earth the way the earth has continued to heal and carry us. So we're asking you to join this work and join this movement. And even when people out here in these streets and they don't understand what it means to be a revolutionary, they think we wilding out, or they think, oh, you guys are talking about the revolution, but what about here and now? I guarantee you, all of the organizers on this line who are serious about this work organize around everything else. And yes, we do vote, but we are very, very clear that voting is not by itself the answer. All the shit that happens before you go to the booth and all the stuff that happens after you go to the booth is just important. So we fight for all of our rights. We fight for the right to do it all, and we reserve the right to use all of the tools necessary to ultimately not only reclaim the land, but reclaim the entirety of who we are as people, whole people living on the land. So I want to turn it back over to Vanna to close us out and just tell y'all I love you, I appreciate you. And again, thank you to all the speakers who put so much time and energy in tonight.
Thank you. Thank y'all. This was so good. I can't say it enough. Save the chat. This has been I'm just like still trying to soak it in. So y'all go take a good shower, bath, or whatever wind down practices you have. I appreciate all of y'all. And good night, good night, good night. Appreciate y'all.
Mackenzie, I see you, baby. I see you, baby.
And Jeanette, you want to give us our closing affirmation?
Baby. Look, I ain't even have to step in the building the whole time to get filled with the knowledge and the spirit that is in this digital space up in here. I am appreciative of every single one of you. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you to Vanna, to Gav, Derek, Trev, Garrison, Gabby, for just laying
Juniper.
it down. Who? I'm sorry.
Juniper.
Juniper, I'm sorry. I didn't come into the space the whole time. I had prior obligations, but I just want to thank y'all all for just adding to this collective gumbo pot of knowledge, right? So I hope that we've all soaked it up, right? I hope we process it in our dreams, let it get into us on a cellular level, and then we are fortified to do the work that we need to do, right? Right? I see you, Aretha. I see you. So just to call our revolutionary sister Assata Shakur into the space, as she is exiled from her homeland, right? Exiled from her homeland for raising the consciousness of working class people, right? But she gave us the blueprint. She gave us the keys to the kingdom as far as what we need to sustain ourselves in this revolutionary struggle. And I want y'all all to put yourselves on mute, but shout it to the rooftop. Let your neighbor hear you when I say, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and protect each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and protect each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. All right, let him hear you. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and protect each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. We have nothing to lose but our chains. One more time, we got nothing to lose but our goddamn chains. Ashe, ashe. Rest well, everyone. Vonnegut told you, take your little bath, get your little wine on. Maybe you eat a little ice cream, get a little kiss from your boo thing. Y'all love each other, love yourself. You're worthy of all things on this earth. Simply because you breathe, simply because you live. Know that.
Yeah.
Know that.
Yes.
Know that. Have a beautiful night. Happy birthday, Aretha. I know it's coming up. Happy birthday. I love y'all so, so, so much. Blue, I see you, boo. Britt, Biggie, I see you. Catherine, I see you. Tina, I see you. Brittany, I see you. Claire, Trev, I see you. Yes. James, I see you in the hoodie. What's good? Yes. Yes. Rest well, everyone. Love y'all. Mickey, I love y'all. Mackenzie, love y'all so much. Have a great night.
Good night.
Baby, let me save this chat. Good night.
Good night.
Looking for me?
Speakers, hold tight for one quick minute. We're gonna let everybody log out real quick.
I'm still